The next methodology we're going to cover is definitely going to take multiple lectures to go over, just because the concepts are very different from what we've learned in the waterfall, the incremental, and the other models that we've covered. So this one is a very unique method, and it's called Agile. So Agile was spun off of the waterfall methodology, and it kind of is the competing model to waterfall. Waterfall is extremely rigid, extremely staged, and you have to work through one thing at a time, and it takes a long time to get complete with it. Agile was created to completely throw that away. They wanted something that could be more quick to get something out to the business, as well as have something that can deal with requirements changes more frequently. And that way you can keep up to speed on them and keep going with the business. We're going to talk about two different Agile methodologies. And the first one is the Scrum model. So this is a kind of a subset of the Agile framework, if you will. And that's what we'll cover right now. So the Scrum model uses an iterative approach, and they call them sprints. So one thing you'll learn with Agile is they have different terminology for the different things they're utilizing. So we'll go over all the terminology. I'll make sure I explain it all to you. So if you're going into a company, or if you work for a company that's using an Agile approach, you get some basics and some background around it. So again, it uses an iterative approach, and they're called sprints. So if you look up here on my model, kind of the image that I have on there, it shows you that you come in on that initial red arrow on the discover, and you work through a design, which is in yellow. You go through in the green and you develop, and then the blue is you test. And that kicks you to the next sprint. And we'll get more into sprints a little bit later on the next slides. A great thing about the Agile methodology and the Scrum model in general is it's very flexible and adaptable, and it's great for dealing with the unknown. One perfect example is Google uses Agile, and they use kind of their own methodology, but their autonomous driving cars, their self-driving cars, is all being built on Agile. This is a leading edge technology. They don't know a whole lot about it. They need to be flexible and adaptable to different requirements and things that come up. And so it helps a lot for them to utilize a Scrum model. Scrum values individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So the waterfall methodology is all about processes and the tools it takes to get there. The Scrum model uses the people and the project team and interacting with them a lot more frequently than the processes and tools. Another thing is the Agile methodology and the Scrum model has a lot less documentation that's being done. And we'll talk about that a lot further as well. But you don't have a big requirements document that comes out when you utilize a Scrum model. You have some base requirements kind of written down. The formality depends on the company that you're working for that utilizes this. Some are very formal and a little bit more detailed. Other companies use very little to no documentation that comes out of it. So it's different, but they really value the interactions. They also value working software over the comprehensive documentation. So we kind of just talked about that. They don't need documentation. They want to get something and get it ready to go. They don't care to sit back and make sure that's all designed and documented 100% prior to engaging. The next thing is they value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. They want the customer to be there. They don't want the customer to say, oh, okay, well, here's the budget and here's what we want to do. They want to say, get in here, Mr. Customer, and let's start working through this, and you can tell us when we're good, right? We can work with you and start collaborating with you and determining how we're going to meet your needs. And another thing is they value responding to change over following a plan. The waterfall methodology and kind of the linear ones are very process driven, right? You have your step. And Agile, while it has some steps, those could change, they could fluctuate, and they like to be able to respond to change and quickly adjust for that change rather than saying, oh, we can't do that, that's not part of our process, we have to wait till we circle back around or whatever. So Agile and the Scrum model is much more flexible. So the Scrum model, as I kind of mentioned here, is one of many different Agile methods. The other ones include extreme programming, crystal clear, feature-driven, and there's actually another one that I don't have listed that we're going to be covering today, which is the rapid application deployment. So that's what the Scrum model at a very high level looks like. So now let's dive into the Scrum model a little bit more and let's understand it a little bit further. So as you'll see on this slide, I have different things underlined, and those are different terms that you're going to hear throughout utilizing the Scrum model. So very good to have a good understanding of what they are. So the first off, the project team completes sprints. So the project team, a group of people, complete these things they called sprints. It's like their iteration. So the sprint is a short iteration from analysis, development, testing, and possibly deploying a product. So the deploying is obviously, it's going to be after a number of sprints most likely, but the sprints can last anywhere from 14 to 30 days, and that's a set time frame. So whether it's 14 days, that's what your sprints are. Whether it's 30 days, that's what your sprints are. It doesn't fluctuate. Usually a company has a certain sprint that they utilize for all their projects, or a certain sprint that they're going to utilize for this particular project. So within 14 days or up to 30 days, you're working through analysis, development, testing, and you're ready to go with one kind of iterative thing. And as you can see, that's a very short time frame. So what you're doing is you're using a subset of prioritized requirements. Obviously, you can't give them everything they want in 14 to 30 days, or why would the other models even exist? I mean, that's impossible. But what you can do is have a prioritized requirement list and start to work through that. So the prioritized requirement list is called a sprint backlog. And so this is basically the backlog of all those requirements that were chosen for that particular sprint. Is what was decided and committed to that could be completed in that sprint. Another term to know is the product backlog. And this is all the different requirements that people want for this particular product, for this particular software. So this is all the products, all the enhancements and all the features and everything they want goes in the product backlog. Every sprint, the team gets together, reviews it, plans it. They determine, okay, let's take the top 10, 15 requirements, prioritized requirements, whatever that is, depending on dependencies and length of time to complete. They pull it in, they commit to that for their sprint, and they start running. So we'll get in through that a little bit more. So the project team is made up of the product owner, which is the business side of things, the Scrum development team, and the Scrum master. So the Scrum development team is the business analysts and developers, designers, that whole development side. And the Scrum master is ultimately the facilitator of the sprints. And so we'll go through it and dive into their roles a little bit more. The product owner is responsible for the return on investment. They're ultimately the ones that their head will roll if the product doesn't meet the needs of the business. They're the ones that are bringing the business need forward. They're the ones that are prioritizing those requirements, and they're determining the what. They're ultimately filling that product backlog with all the requirements and needs of the business. And so they're definitely usually a business user that's being brought in, and usually it's a subject matter expert or somebody up in management, senior management, somebody that has a very good grasp on what that business wants and needs out of this particular software. The Scrum dev team is a cross-functional team, meaning that you're collaborating with business analysts, with designers, with maybe subject matter experts in all those different pieces as part of it. So it's a cross-functional team that you're utilizing and you're collaborating with. And they're the ones that are really determining the how and then making sure that they're able to execute that how and code for that. The Scrum Master is the team facilitator. They don't have any power. They're just there to facilitate, make sure that they're clearing roadblocks, setting time frames and expectations, and they're communicating and providing that visibility of that project and the status of that project and those sprints to executive management or whomever the sponsor is of the particular project. So let's talk a little bit about what they call artifacts. So artifacts are kind of their term for some of the different pieces within the Scrum model and actually Agile in general. The first thing is the product backlog, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but this is a list of features that the business wants, and it's force ranked by the product owner. So when I say force ranked, I mean there can only be one number 1, there can only be one number 2, there can only be one number 3. And trust me, that sounds easier than it's easier said than done to get somebody to force rank them. So if you have a product owner that's able to go through and actually force rank requirements, that's a huge bonus on your project, and that's a huge help. But you need to make sure that they are force ranking them, because you can't have 10 number 1 requirements, because what happens if you can only complete 7 of them in the sprint? You have no way to know what 7 are more important than the other 3. Another thing about the product backlog is anyone can add items. So users may be adding items to the product backlog. Subject matter experts could be adding items. People, I guess, from the Scrum development team I've seen add items to the product backlog if they've seen something and kind of understand a business need and how that can be accomplished. And it could be user stories or use cases that are utilized as to how to, as to basically what that product backlog is. It could be a user story or use case that's documented. If you don't know much about that, you can do some research. Otherwise, I do have some other lectures that cover user stories and use cases. The product backlog does not contain tasks. It is simply a list of requirements. It's not of what tasks need to be completed. It's not a task list. It is what requirements need to be completed to meet that business need. So now let's look at the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog. This is the committed features that will be completed during that current sprint, that 14 to 30 days. So they take requirements from the product backlog, usually based on whatever the highest priorities are, but they may snag some lower priority ones if they're going to be easy to accomplish, and they can squeeze them into that sprint, and they commit to them and say, this is our sprint backlog, this is what we're going to get done in our 14 to 30 days. They have a deadline to complete it, obviously at the end of that sprint. Where the product backlog, there's no deadline, it's just an ongoing list. And there may be features that are put in there, and quite frankly, there will be, that'll never be realized. They'll just keep dropping to the bottom of the list, and they'll never be put in because they're not, it's a good idea maybe, but it's not really very useful, or the return isn't very high, and so they get lower priority. Also with the sprint backlog is, since you have a deadline, you need to track where you're at on all those different requirements. You need to track what wasn't started and what's in progress and what's completed. So you're working through and identifying where are those different committed requirements at, where is that sprint backlog requirements list at, and what does that look like, and what stage are they in.